First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for doing all this work, from the very difficult mechanics to all the food and coffee, very essential. With this presentation, I basically would like to explore how violence in Assassin's Creed Odyssey and its spatial dimensions is employed as a storytelling tool. This presentation should be taken with a grain of salt, as I will try to join a recent strand in research that tries to take the digital world more seriously, inquiring it with the same analytical curiosity and rigor as the non-digital world. By employing concepts and frameworks from sociology and philosophy, I try to investigate how the digital world deals playfully with questions of what is violence, what entails social space, and how do these themes intersect with social and cultural memory. Most video games are steeped in violence, and I'm interested in social and narrative role of violence in such games, how violence creates specific spaces or vice versa, how space creates specific types of violence or lack thereof. I draw specific inspiration from the so-called spatial turn, a part of sociology that is also recently adopted in the digital environments. Ultimately, I go back to the fundamental works of scholars as Henri Lefebvre, Henri Pierre Bourdieu, and Pierre Nora, I am butchering their names. The study of spatiality is approached from at least two distinct analytical divisions. One may investigate how space dictates behavior. For example, how architecture is basically guiding us through the movement that we have through space. And secondly, a recurring line of inquiry in studies of spatiality has been to ask how space is linked with non-physical and symbolical, stressing how the power-related entity or ideology is connected specifically with social behavior through space. These two modalities of space and its relation to social behavior, agentative and instrumental, may very well exist at the same time, but provide a useful analytical distinction that I will come back later in my talk. To get acquainted with the source material, Assassin's Creed Odyssey was part of the new wave of Assassin's Creed series, which the player experiences the historical context by having some agency over the impact that he had in the story and the gameplay. Odyssey, the player is thrown into the Peloponnesian War, 5th century BCE Greek world, where it is famously described by Herodotus and Thucydides, where the city-state Sparta and Athens, as well as their respective city-state allies, are fighting each other. Aside from the very obvious references to the epic poem Odyssey by Homer, the game provides a digital imagination of classical Periclean periods, with detailed reconstructions from temples to ambitious attempts at approximately the relation of people with their land and their gods. The player is embodying the story of the so-called mystios, or mercenary, that has the ability to shift the alliance map of the Greek city-states, turning whole areas from being an ally to Athens to being an ally of Sparta, and vice versa. This is done by shrewd decision-making and Machiavellian techniques, but also through violence. I will discuss the different categories or modalities of violence in 3 case studies. First of all, the experience of violence and its randomness, as seen in the Aegean Sea. The memorialization of violence as witnessed in Thermopylae, a site that is important in the Greco-Persian War. And thirdly, the normativity of non-violence as observed in Delos. Okay. In the immense blue of the digital Aegean, we experience the threat of violence, evoking a sense of anxiety for unpredictable attacks. As you sail around with your crew, you are made aware of the violent tension between the two leagues, how those leagues are in constant opposition, identified by colors of their sail ships, red for Sparta and blue for Athens. Conflict of the two leagues is constant, and the player will be dragged into their fighting. The sea is an open arena of combat with highly dynamic, constantly shifting type of territoriality, which makes the situation unpredictable and the experience vulnerable, if not nerve-wracking. While sailing, the player also sees two other colors. White cells for representing the traders on the non-actors, as they do not engage in any violence, while the black cells indicate the outlaws or pirates. These outlaws of the game are probably understood as an unidentified cultural other, a non-conformist group that does not follow the political reality and whose goal is to just raid other people's ships. These outlaws and pirates have the tendency to attack the player and city-state-owned ships without warning. Traveling in the Aegean is thus tricky, as time spent traveling is fundamentally determined by the degree of violence the player will experience. The sea could be understood as a natural and dynamic space in which the different actors, Spartan, Athenians, traders, and outlaws, whose specific ideology and political affiliations and territorial claims are manifested. Next stop is the mountainous path of Thermopylae, a place of the legendary Battle of 480 BCE, whose formed part of the Greco-Persian Wars, where the Persian army led by Xerxes defeated the Greek forces led by Spartan king Leonidas. In the game, the Battle of Thermopylae is memorialized not long after the battle, with a monumental lion statue, marking the resting place of Leonidas. The memorial itself seems a bit too old, since in that point of history, it should have existed only for 10 years. The site may be interpreted as actualization of social or communicative memory, as described by Jan Assmann. Assmann describes such actualizations as the remembering of an event, in this case a very violent and traumatic event, communicated and built upon within approximately one generation. In Assmann's theory, such social memory can later become uncultural memory, which entails a transformation of shorter-term communicated memory into a longer-term societal memory. In the case of Thermopylae, 10 years after the battle, the memory of the bloody defeat of the Greeks will still be considered as social and communicative memory, while the memorialization with the lion monument, through its material and visual presence, facilitates its transformation into becoming a form of cultural memory. In terms of experiencing this place of memorialized violence, the protagonist of the game furthermore has an intimate connection with the site, and turns out they are related to Leonidas. By carrying around a spearhead of Leonidas, an intimate biographical connection is forged between the protagonist and the slain Spartan king. In this case, pointed steel of deadly weapon features a portable memory of one's origins. Our last stop is Delos. After we have maneuvered our way through the bickering ships of Sparta and Athens and outsmarted the pirates, we arrive to the most holy island of the Aegean. Here, violence is strictly forbidden, a prohibition that is explicitly written down in sacred laws. In the game, ancient Greek tradition is acknowledged, but yet the player is still able to kill and physically abuse people on the island. Interestingly, the developers have included a small side quest and a dialogue with Socrates that reflects on the violence taking place in the sacred island of Apollo. Socrates tells a story about a rebel, a Delian rebel who was captured after stealing from the sanctuary to finance his rebellion and make his island independent from the Peloponnesian War. After being found red-handed by the guards, he tries to escape and kills one of them. Following the sacred laws, he is to be transported in the neighboring island of Mykonos, where he will be killed. Socrates then asks the protagonist, "How do you deal with a rebel?" And then the protagonist can ask, what do you consider as justice? Were the rebel's actions bad if the intention was good to help his community? Is the definition of good or bad behavior predicted by the sacred laws or by the intention and outcomes? In this strictly non-violent place, the problematic question of violence and ethics seems particularly pressing and complex. To go back to the thesis of this presentation, the goal of this presentation was not to investigate why there is so much violence in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, or how it relates to violence in the non-digital world. Naturally, the latter is more important. The three case studies are working in tensions. In the Aegean Sea, there is the vulnerable and dynamic territorialization. With the memorialization of the Battle of Thermopylae, we have to experience visual and sustaining memory, and in Delos, a small confined space allows for ritualizing non-violence, including the sacred laws. Periclean Greece is not an innocent historical context. Every new imagination of the 5th century Greece is entangled with a long history of mostly Western appropriation of the past, themselves not rarely forming a foundation of violent ideologies in a non-digital world through colonialism, imperialism, and white supremacy, portraying 5th century Eastern Mediterranean in a playful yet utterly violent manner that then needs to be reflected on. While not wanting to fall into the rabbit hole of fact-checking popular media, it is our role as academics to poke game developers back and point out the impact of their work. In the end, the way that we retell and teach history is political. How does Assassin's Creed Odyssey depict violence in space? And while trying to tackle this question, my mind goes, does space influence the kind of violence, or does violence influence space? My way of trying to answer the research question is by firstly asking what is violence to begin with and what is space in cultures dated in the 5th century Eastern Mediterranean that are ontologically so far away from our modern understanding of those questions. Would Socrates answer those questions in the same way? I think not. And maybe not taking into account playful interactions such as video games, a player might partially attempt to understand how an ancient Greek citizens might have thought about it. As Foucault also noted, space is a manifestation of power structures. Either if it is in the randomness of violence in the landscape, memorialized self-sacrifice, and ritualizing non-violence, it is due to ideology and power entities we have probably adopted. Thank you.